Welcome to the CEC Report for the 9th of October 2015. I'm Elisa Barwick and joining me today is Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Elisa, and welcome back to you.
Thank you. And on today's show, the system is cracking. We need Glass-Steagall, not QE4. And Russia outflanks Anglo-American permanent war agenda in Syria. Let's collaborate for peace. So firstly, the system is cracking. We need Glass-Steagall, not QE4. Now, in the last few days, there's been a number of articles pointing to what we've been speaking about on this show for the last several weeks, namely that we're in the midst of a new GFC. So I'll just mention a couple of those reports. The Economist edition, October 3rd to 9th, had an article, and this is the banner publication for the City of London financial interests, of course, warning that the system is cracking, and they called for an all-out effort to backstop the bubble with new waves of quantitative easing, meaning money printing. Now, they pointed out in the article that today there is no backstop for the dollar system and that the sums involved in such a new bailout would be much higher than 2008.
Well, global debt has increased by over $50 trillion since 2008, so it has to be higher.
Exactly, and the liabilities of the banks, their derivatives exposures and so forth. But they did have a proviso in there. They had a major warning where they said this time there is a possibility that the US Congress might instead go for a regulation of the banks rather than a bailout. And they said that other countries may insulate themselves from the collapse of the dollar bubble by embracing capital controls.
And for some people in the City of London, that's their worst fear. Our reading of the US Congress is the same, that there's no, especially in an election year, there's no political will for another bailout. They're lucky they didn't get lynched last time.
Yes.
And therefore, the option of Glass-Steagall, which is in everyone's face, our associates have kept it there, and it's a big movement around it, is very much the first option for them. Okay, we've resisted it too long, let's go back to it.
And we'll come back to that. But Forbes magazine also had coverage of this. On October 7th, Antoine Gara wrote about the danger of a new financial blowout and particularly put emphasis on the underlying problem being the gigantic pile of derivatives sitting on top of numerous nominal debt bubbles, so bubbles upon bubbles. He pointed out that derivatives exposure has blown out since 2008 and that is the life-death issue for the banks.
And that's true for Australia as well, emphatically, Elisa. We've documented this here. There's been a massive increase in derivatives on our banks since 2008. But what people should know is that all the borrowings our banks have done, there's a special derivative called credit default swaps, which they're on the hook. Our banks are on the hook for a lot because it's their way of convincing themselves they're insured against their exposure to their loans, and the price of those credit default swaps has ballooned in the last little period, right? Which means the investors around the world looking at Australian banks are going, you're looking riskier and riskier to us.
And speaking of derivatives, everyone's heard about the crisis at Glencore, and reports are coming out over the recent week that 60 of the biggest banks in the world are very heavily exposed to Glencore. This is the mining and commodities trading giant. And these 60 banks all lent money to Glencore to make loans to oil producers, but on the basis of the price of around $100 a barrel. Yeah. And Glencore, of course, have $2 trillion nominal exposure to derivatives on their books.
And this could be connected, it's not quite clear yet, but Deutsche Bank announced a massive loss this week for a part-year loss of nearly $10 billion. The thing with Deutsche Bank, it's the world's biggest derivatives exposed bank. Its derivatives is more than that one bank's derivatives alone is more than the whole world GDP, right? So when you've got a big operator like Glencore in resources and a big bank like Deutsche Bank, and there's a toss-up with which one of them could be the new Lehman Brothers.
Yeah, and Credit Suisse is another name that's coming up in connection to Glencore as well. But this week, led by Goldman Sachs, Wall Street has called for the near certainty of new QE4. They've basically declared that it's going to happen, and this happened following the release of the US Labor Department's September employment report, which was so bad in terms of the collapsing productive activity of the United States that Wall Street basically knew that a new bailout was theirs and declared that it was going to take place. But of course, we need, instead of such a bailout, Glass-Steagall, which is gaining momentum in the US, and it's really recognised quite openly in those countries as the recognised alternative to a bailout. But I wanted to ask about the fact that it is not really so publicly acknowledged as such an alternative here. So what can be done about that?
Well, our new Prime Minister, of course, is one of these Goldman Sachs hatchet men. So we'll have more to say on that in future weeks, but we put out a release on that today. So I'm not holding my breath that it'll become publicly discussed here. We know behind the scenes it's well known here. The key thing is, though, Wall Street is in the United States, the City of London is in the United Kingdom, and the political debates in both those countries are actually revolving around Glass-Steagall, especially in the United States, where the Democratic Party has entirely coalesced around this, and Hillary Clinton, whose husband repealed it, is being dragged. She's so far resisting it, but every other prominent Democrat is demanding Glass-Steagall because, like I said, they know that no one in the American public will tolerate a bailout of Wall Street again. There has to be a different system, and you can't argue with the system that Roosevelt put in place after this a similar period of financial insanity in the 20s and the Great Depression, which worked. For 66 years, no systemic banking crises in the United States, right? So this is, people understand in the UK and in Europe, we've got to ram it through here. We lead the fight for that, and people can participate with us in that fight by getting involved.
Contacting us. And I'll just mention that in the UK there was a little freak out this week because they're talking about Glass-Steagall there heavily as well. And of course you have this new leader of the Labor Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who's talking about that and in favour of that. And so in the Daily Telegraph there was a little freak out saying, well, Corbyn could never become Prime Minister unless there's a new GFC and a new bailout which all falls upon the taxpayers.
And then all bets would be off because the public reaction would be so enraged they probably would vote for Corbyn.
Exactly. Now after the break we're going to talk about the war front. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Russia outflanks Anglo-American permanent war agenda in Syria. Let's collaborate for peace. Now, viewers will be aware that, of course, Russia launched over the last 10 days a new offensive against Islamic State in Syria. They have now flown, in 10 exact days, they've flown over 75 sorties with many successful hits against more than 50 ISIS locations, including hitting a bomb-making facility, command posts and ammunitions and armaments depots. They've used, it's been characterised by very precise intelligence, which they've set up a new intelligence hub with the countries in the region to accomplish that. Very precise targeting and using the most advanced technologies available in the world. Of course, the reaction of ISIS is very telling. Someone on the ground, a source, reported it as being panic. You've had several hundreds of ISIS members fleeing their headquarters in Raqqa. And they've been taken by surprise, I would say, by the Russian approach, because some of them were saying, look, we used to be hit by the Americans first thing in the morning at dawn and then nothing, but Russia has been hitting repeatedly and it's a constant engagement. The Russians said that basically they're engaging targets day and night and in any kind of weather.
And the Russians are showing up that what has been happening in the last 18 months or so that Australia's been involved in just hasn't been serious. And we'll talk a bit more why it hasn't been serious, but it hasn't been serious. And one of the factors we can talk about now is that, we've been trying to play this double game, the West of, we're going to beat ISIS and we're going to topple Assad.
Yeah. And
because we think we have the right to decide which regimes rise and which regimes fall. This is the new Bush-Blair era that we're in, right? And that Obama's continued on. And the Russians say, no, we believe in the principle of national sovereignty, which we in the CEC applaud them for because we do as well. Other countries don't get to determine who should be the government or who shouldn't be the government of a country. Therefore, Assad's the legitimate president of Syria. He's invited us into this country, so we are there legally, which all the wars we've been involved in, Elisa, have been illegal wars, right? But we say might makes right, so we can get away with it. And Russia says, we are going to beat these guys, and they're showing in 10 days just how successful you can be. And none of this, viewers who are watching the show will recognise that what you've just gone through, is not getting reported in the media. All we're getting is these complaints about, oh, Russia's hitting the wrong targets, or we're getting this, oh, Russia has their own agenda here, blah, blah, blah.
Well, the most recent complaint, of course, is that Russia's being attacked for supporting, quote unquote, all opponents of Assad. So not just ISIS, but also the Western allies, which are the so-called moderate extremist forces which the US has allied with, or the Anglo-Americans and the broader coalition.
Now, that wasn't a slip of the tongue. You meant to say moderate extremists, because that's what we're being told the Free Syrian Army is.
Yeah.
They're moderate terrorists, and it's just not true. Everyone knows it's not true. Silly John McCain went there and, in trying to drum up this insurrection in the first place and posed with people who later became the leaders of ISIS, right? It's never been true, and the Russians are saying, cut the crap, let's go, we can beat these guys, and they're showing we can.
And in reaction to these Russian strikes, al-Nusra announced the creation of a joint military operations centre in one region of Syria to respond to this, but the Free Syrian Opposition Army has joined that. There's leading officers that have joined that, so it just shows there is no moderate opposition. And even the media now is putting out the line where they don't talk about Russian strikes against ISIS anymore. They talk about the strikes against opponents of Assad.
Yep.
So they're putting out the line on this. Now, on the 2nd of October, there was a joint statement put out by the US, the UK, France, Germany, Turkey and the Gulf allies, accusing Russia of this targeting of all of the opponents of Assad, including the moderate allies, saying this means that Russia is only acting, their only interest is to shore up the Assad government. And David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, backed this up, and probably it was his instigation, where he said that Russia is not discriminating between ISIL and the legitimate Syrian opposition. Therefore, Russia is actually backing the butcher Assad and helping him. So that's the line. And of course, the other little freak out just over the last 24 hours is the fact that Russia launched this extraordinary operation of 26 cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea, which travelled 1,500 or so kilometres, hitting their targets inside Syria. So, of course, this is creating dangerous skies in the region. But on the other hand, Obama just was forced to admit that they bombed this Médecins Sans Frontières hospital in Afghanistan. And, of course, what hoo-ha's being made about that?
Well, and the MSF case is a terrible, terrible case. It's particularly bad because when it happened a few days after Russia started its intervention, and one of the first complaints about Russia is they weren't being precise enough, and an American military commander basically tried to maintain that when America bombs, as opposed to Russia, America uses moral bombs because they're very precise. He went out of his way to say how precise America's bombing was. Well, America's precision bombing just destroyed a hospital in Kunduz, Doctors Without Borders hospital, and the MSF, Doctors Without Borders, had told all the sides in the conflict where its hospital was, right? So they all knew
repeatedly.
That when it started, they contacted the American authorities and said, you're bombing a hospital, and the bombing went on for an hour and 10 minutes afterwards. And Elisa, people are questioning whether it relates to what happened under Obama's watch in Afghanistan relates to the fact that 2 months earlier, Doctors Without Borders said that they're going to lead the fight against the Trans-Pacific Partnership abomination agreement that's just been signed to give, it's a Bill of Rights for multinational corporations, because the pharmacy laws that will come under that TPP will deny medicines, essential life-saving medicines, to 2 billion people, right? And no one messes with this guy Obama. From the get-go in the White House, he took pleasure in identifying drone targets, personally signing off on them, killing with impunity, right? He's a creep. He's a real creep. The longer he's in there, he shows that. And what's happened in this hospital, they're now saying, it's just an accident, Well, we in Australia roundly condemned the Ukrainian rebels for downing MH17, which at worst was a misunderstanding. If they did it, there's no proof they did it yet. At worst, it was a misunderstanding. They've been called war criminals and the worst. The US, with all its might, with all its precision capability, has just done this, and it's atrocious. It's an atrocity, and you can't rule out that there's something more sinister behind it.
Yep, and it really, all of this really begs the question, who is this Russian action hurting more? Islamic State or the Obama agenda? Because you would really think that everyone would be very, very happy at what Russia's doing and how effective it is. But
except, and just quickly, because look, ISIS is a creation of Barack Obama. In 2012, the United States Defense Intelligence Agency said to the White House, listen, what we're doing in Syria is going to lead to the rise of an Islamic State. But you guys want that against Assad. And it did lead to the rise of Islamic State, the horror that's just been unleashed on the world. And whether this 15-year-old, if this 15-year-old boy was inspired by it to do this killing in Sydney last week, then he was inspired by something that our allies created, and unfortunately with our government support.
So we'll stop there, but after the break we'll talk about the pathway out of this mess to peace. Welcome back to the CEC Report.
Now, Elisa, you've been away for a couple of weeks, including attending a conference in St. Petersburg on issues that do relate to the bigger picture that we've been discussing here today. So tell the viewers what you've been up to.
Yes, so myself and fellow CEC executive member Gabrielle Pewitt attended a conference put on by the Russian government in St. Petersburg on the 24th to the 25th of September, and it was hosted by Senator Valentina Matvienko, who's the chairman of the Federation Council, which is basically the upper house of the Russian Federation or the Russian Parliament.
I think she's the third ranking politician in Russia.
She's a very, very senior figure and close to Putin and so forth. Now, there were 741 delegates there from 80 countries, and the Federation Council website described them as being from the USA, Western Europe and Australia, despite the sanctions. And we represented the CEC, but also we were the only representatives from Australia that attended. Now, Matvienko's keynote speech was crucial in really indicating the intent of this event to forge a pathway for peace, and the fact that they had all these countries from around the globe really showed their commitment. And Matvienko spoke in her speech about development, global collaboration and development for the benefit for the whole of mankind, she said, not just a portion of it. And she stressed that war cannot be eliminated in this kind of unipolar world that has developed. And she talked about the refugee crisis in that context and so forth. Now, Gabrielle Pewitt was able to give an address. She was invited to address the panel on women and the evolving economy, and she spoke about our conception of uplifting and developing the world, and she also spoke about Helga Zepp-LaRouche's call to the UNGA, which was to occur within a few days' time.
That's the UN General Assembly.
Yeah, about what is needed to put the world back on track. And I want to show a clip here where Gabby was able to present Senator Matvienko with a copy of our World Land Bridge Report.
Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
If I may indulge just for one moment, I'd like to present to you
Если позволите, буквально на секунду хотел бы представить вам
a very special report that we compiled in 2014
отчет, специальный отчет, который мы подготовили еще в 2014 году
with our associates in America through Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
с помощью наших представителей, наших ассоциированных членов в Америке, господином Ларушем.
And our close associate Helga Zepp-LaRouche from the German Schiller Institute.
И также представителями Германского института Шилла.
Something that we've been working on for over 20 years, which is called the New Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge.
Это, по сути, результат нашей работы, которая проводилась на протяжении последних 20 лет. Это отчет «Новый шелковый путь».
In fact, Helga Zepp-LaRouche is referred to in China as the Silk Road Lady.
И Ларуш ссылается в том числе на Китай как один из источников шелкового пути.
This proposal that we've worked on for 20 years is the solution to the association of the new cultural paradigm
В данном случае мы считаем, что вот эти предложения, с которыми мы вышли в этом отчете, это новое предложение, новые парадигмы развития взаимоотношений,
that Russia and China are leading on the initiatives of the BRICS,
которые поддержаны как Россией, так и Китаем, Республика Китай, в рамках БРИКС,
and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization,
и также Шанхайской организацией сотрудничества
the Economic Belt.
и экономического.
And from my country, I'd like to congratulate China and Russia. It is the future for the world.
И я бы хотела от лица нашей страны поблагодарить Китай и Россию.
Can I ask you about one question? Okay.
Могу задать один
Вот
вопрос
мне
вам.
задали вопрос, будут ли женщины, которые участвуют в форуме, выступать против санкций. Австралия, к сожалению, тоже присоединилась к санкциям. Санкции – это пережиток прошлого, это попытки запретить нам общаться, встречаться, обмениваться мнениями, вести диалог. Как вы относитесь к санкциям? Будете ли вы выступать по возвращению в Австралию против любых санкций?
I was actually asked in course of the forum, speaking of the sanctions which were imposed, and Australia was part of those countries who actually accepted the sanctions. And what is your attitude to the sanctions, and whether there will be any action taken on lifting them?
Our political organisation in Australia has very much opposed what the Australian government has done in the last number of years, and it's a long history. I could take up the whole press conference.
Наши политические круги наметилось большое разногласие с политическим руководством страны в Австралии.
But what I can say to you in terms of opposition to this particular policy, which is directed by the Australian government from the British Crown.
Но могу подчеркнуть, что вот эта оппозиция, она во многом на нее повлияло воздействие со стороны британской короны, Великобритании.
And also the financial establishment under the major banking system. We put out over 500,000 New Citizen newspapers, each edition, to a population of 23 million people. There's a great movement against this policy being driven by Australia.
На самом деле в Австралии идет большое, широкое движение за то, чтобы снять эти санкции.
Correct answer.
Это правильный ответ.
Now, the exchange continued after that, where they were able to talk about the situation in Syria more broadly and the war front. And Matvienko concluded by declaring, "We love Australia." And there was a subsequent interaction between Gabrielle and Matvienko where she passionately urged Gabby to tell Australians that Russia is a good country, a peace-loving country that does not want war, because she knows that that's not understood. So we were able to have discussions with many very high-level people from across the globe, which was a very important intervention, I think, just pre the UNGA meeting, to establish what is required. And I think a very important intervention.
And the fact that you're there representing Australia as the only delegate, even in an informal way, you're being ambassadors for our country and showing these other countries around the world that despite our alliances with the US and the UK, not everyone here wants an agenda that's going to end up in world war.
Exactly, and people were very happy to see that someone was there from Australia, not least of which were the Russians. But you can read more about our reports of these events and everything else we've talked about today if you ring in to get a free copy of our Australian Alert Service and find out a bit more about why Australia has to begin to open up our relations with countries like Russia and China if we want world peace. So thanks for tuning into the CEC Report, and see you again next week.